Hi, everyone. So it's the official starting time for the meeting, but I'll give people a few more moments to join. Please add your name to the notes. Share video if you feel comfortable doing so. Please remember, though, that this will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. We're just giving people a few minutes to join. Okay, so it seems that the join rate has slowed. Welcome, everyone. This is a session to go over the RPC roadmap for using Git and GitHub. There's in the notes a link to a wiki page with a description of the phases. Richard.
Just quick scope question. Are we also discussing editing and markdown as part of this?
We can. Part of this is because GitHub and Markdown seem to go hand in hand. Where would you like to add that? Should at the end of the meeting or throughout? What's your
I'll
thought
keep
think?
an eye out as we go.
Okay, cool. All right, so as I mentioned, this session is being recorded. Please note your name in the meeting notes. We've got a document with the roadmap. It's linked to on the notes page. So I'd like to go over where we are currently. So right now, the RFC Production Center has does not have version control the way a developer would view version control. We create snapshots. We have like file backups. We work in a flat file system. So there is another page on the wiki that describes our current processes. We are getting our tools updated. We're getting a new queue management system, a new editing software, and a new website being developed by the IETF tools team. So part of this is just using version control ourselves. And so the first phase of getting GitHub is just rolling out version control. So any general questions before I get into these details? I'll just step through the roadmap. Paul.
I was just laughing when you said earlier, Gene, that this is not how developers work. This is
Yeah.
how plenty of developers work. And even as you look in some of the working groups that are feeding you, the version control really is snapshots, magic is done off on the side, and something comes back. So it's fine however you want to do it, but don't feel like you need to be starting to do branches and things like that to match what everyone else is doing. You will be matching what some group is doing, but not all of us.
I'll be talking about branching because branching can match what we do right now as our team edits the docs. So, all right. Let me get my notes in front of me. So the first phase is going to be using Git and GitHub internally for our own purposes, for version control, for issue tracking, and getting just comfortable with those processes. So the idea is that when a document is approved for publication, our queue management system, Purple, will create a repo. And this repo will have functionality that will help editors as they work. My sketch here has borrowed heavily from Martin Thompson's repo template. As I mentioned, Purple creates the repo and puts the document in it. And then we would have an internal wiki page that would allow editors to view outputs. So one of the first things that'll happen is that the outputs for RFC XML will be generated, the PDF, the HTML, the text. We will have a wiki page where we can click, we can look at these and go, yep, it looks good. As we make edits, we can see the changes that we have made compared to the version in Data Tracker. So very similar to what Martin Thompson's repo template offers, where you have the working copy and you can click the link to see how it has changed from what's currently in Data Tracker. We've got, so we mentioned branching. The idea is that the editors are going to be interacting with these repos using our new editing software, DraftForge, which is being built on VS Code libraries. So an editor would be able to clone the repo, work in it locally, well, create a branch, work in it locally, push small commits, and when they are done with their pass, then they create the pull request. So passes include some pre-edit work, the formatting, reference checking, and when the document is assigned to a primary editor, and the primary editor does the first pass of copy editing, they will review those pull requests from the formatter and the ref checks, and then merge those into main, then create their own branch and start working on the copy edits. So I'm seeing some comments here. Paul?
I'm concerned with something that you just said, which is that two people will be working essentially on the whole document for different purposes, formatting, ref check, etc. Merging pull requests is a complete pain in the butt. It is hard for everyone to do. I would say the number of people who can do this easily is very small. And yet it is something that's commonly done. I would just throw up a big red flag here and propose that instead of trying to do everything in parallel, you actually do a little bit of serializing so that that first person who's taking those 2 pull requests, their job is not much harder. There are tools that will help them. Richard Barnes is probably about to tell me about many of them. I know about them. There are a group of people who feel just fine with it, and there's a much larger group of people who run away screaming. So just be aware of that.
Okay. My thinking is, and we have worked with this. So the RPC has already done GitHub training. We've done pull requests on each other's docs. We've handled merge conflicts. The formatting pass and the ref check pass tends to touch different parts of the document. The merges should be pretty clean. You work with one first, you merge it, and then look at the second one. Richard.
Yeah, I had kind of a meta question here, which I'm happy to defer if you want to talk about this a little bit more and come back to it later. But like all this internal stuff, sure, doesn't actually matter in terms of what the community needs. Like what the working groups out there need is not any of these internal processes. It's for the RPC to integrate well with the Git processes that the working groups are using. So where is that in the timeline?
So there is phase 2 where we make these repos available for authors to interact with. In our own surveys of how working groups use or don't use GitHub, there's not that much consistency. We're looking for the ability to work consistently with our own processes and use this for version control, and then have using our queue management system to help us with the creation of the repos and also publishing out of them when the documents are approved. And the second phase, we will make the repos open. Authors can view our pull requests. They can view the issue tracker. And then there will be a feature available that will allow authors to port this back to their repos.
Okay, let me ponder that.
Yeah.
So,
Jay?
Yeah, I wonder if we're confusing 2 separate things here. Okay, so is there anybody who objects to the basic principle that the RPC will fork a repository and work on a repository itself, with its own practices? Because if there's nobody that objects to that, then the question of differing working group practices, doesn't need to come into this. We're not talking about the RPC trying to follow individual working processes.
And this is a creation of a new repo for us to work in. We are not forking working group repos.
Okay, sorry. So just
stage.
Oh, so you're creating a new one. You're creating a new one.
Yes, these are new. Yes,
Yeah.
new repos for us to work in. Because the working group repos, different actions, different ways they're maintaining it. Some working groups put all their documents in the repo, and we are going to have one repo per document.
Okay, yeah, that's sorry. Thank you for explaining. So the initial question is, does that prevent anything? Is there anybody out there as an author who's saying, hang on, if you do it that way, then I won't be able to get what I need out of it, assuming I have the right visibility and things of their structure the way I want them? Okay.
I think my comment coming up is actually partly an answer to that, which is I think Gene had it exactly right, and it answers Richard's point to a degree, which is no, you're taking what is in someone else's Git repo, copying it. I mean, forking it in a more elaborate way into your own repo, creating your own repo with it. So you're not even going to take anything directly from.
Right. It's a fresh repo. We
So
get a
the
document in the
submission
queue, it's
process will
fresh.
look pretty much the way it does today, and you're
Yes.
just going to make a fresh repo, which and that to me answers Richard's question of this does not integrate at all with what's going on in working groups. And in order to do that, you would have to, it would be a very different kind of change going on. My understanding, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jean.
What we would like to do in the second phase is after the authors have completed the review of the document for Auth48, is provide them the ability to take those edits, that information into their repos. If there's provide a way for them to merge those changes back into their repos. So we would be working in the RPC repo during the final review, but we do want the authors to be able to take that information back to their working group repos or their individual repos, because we do understand that people want to continue working on these documents to just go ahead and be prepared to do the BIS doc. And we want to, we do want to help with that. And as Richard asked, could he ask about Markdown? One of the things, a small step in this direction is just providing Markdown files at the beginning of Auth48 and working through our questions and author updates in the Markdown. This makes it easier for authors to work in their own repos while and incorporate RPC changes. And that's a small step in supporting authors in their repos. When we're not touching the repos, but it makes it easier for them to, just commit these changes and review them there.
Okay, so sorry to jump in, but can we just nail this point down? Does the creation of a brand new repo like this fundamentally prevent authors taking the stuff they want from that and pulling it into their repository? Or does it just add some complexity around it that needs to be addressed?
Well, I'm going to address that point, so maybe we can just run the queue.
Your volume's a little low there.
Yeah, I can't hear you, Ecker.
I said I'm going to address that point, so maybe we can just run the queue.
Yes, Ecker, please.
So, I mean, I think it plainly isn't plausible for the RPC to take everybody's individual repos and fork them, because everyone's individual repos, as Gene said, are idiosyncratic. So that's obviously not going to work. What facilitates the authors being able to re-ingest this data is having a clean version of the source material, the source code, in fair copy form that is roughly the same as would go back into producing a BIS document, right? And so what facilitates that is having the separation of, as I said before, the copy edit material and perhaps some of the reference cleanup. Although, frankly, the references often don't really matter to the authors very much. They just assume that RPC will fix them up at the end of the day. By which I mean, if I'm referencing, version 19, but really the current version is 20, like I just don't really care about that very much. Someone will fix that up later. And then just being able to copy that over back into my repo the same way as it was before. So I don't think it has to be the case that this has to preserve a Git history across the operation of the RPC's cleanup in the RFC publication. With that said, I do think that, to the extent to which lots of people are using basically the same template and using Martin Thompson's scripts with one per repo, it would not be the worst thing in the world if the RPC just forked those repos as they were, rather than making new ones. But I also don't think it's necessary. So I think to try to recast what Richard was saying a few minutes ago, I think what Richard meant about integrating with GitHub working group processes is that what the working group authors and editors expect is to have the stuff in GitHub, to have, to have changes proposed, to have things tracked in issues, and to have changes proposed in pull requests, and be able to process those pull requests with review and revision and then merge in. And so I think that's what he meant by integration, and not not that like the RPC had to submit PRs against the working group repos as they were. I don't think that's I don't think that's practical, given that working groups are already doing their own idiosyncratic stuff. If at some point we ended up with one canonical repo format, I'd revisit that decision. I see Richard sort of nodding his head, so I think I've got that correct. I guess I was a little surprised to sort of hear you say that these repos would be open later. I guess I don't quite understand that. I certainly understand why you might want to take pull requests from the authors during some initial phase, but I really don't understand why the repos are not public and under any, essentially from minute zero.
Okay, well, during phase one, we're still ironing out our processes, and so we would just like to do that in private repos. We figure this will take a few months as we work through this, and we will we'll continue to use the mail-based Auth48 process while we're doing this. And then the second phase, we will, at the beginning of Auth48, make the repo public. If the authors and the stream manager agree to work in a repo, and then we can make available the issues, the pull requests, and authors can make pull requests, and we can work collaboratively in the repo. But at the beginning, we're ironing out our own internal processes.
Well, I guess I understand that, but I guess I want to distinguish between using the repos for collaboration and having the repos be public. As has been pointed out a number of times, the IETF claims to operate in a transparent fashion, and I really don't understand any reason why this information cannot be public. And Paul, to what you're saying, is perfectly possible to mark the repos so that it cannot be commented on. And so they don't have to be used for collaboration. But I guess I really don't understand why all this material cannot be public from the very beginning. Even if it's read-only. I used to work for an organization, I used to work for an organization that was open source, and people would come on and they'd be junior, they make all kinds of horrible mistakes, and they'd make them in public. And so I just don't understand what the reason is why this information can't be public from the very beginning.
Yeah, I would plus one that point about biasing toward being public.
Again, I want to be clear that what I mean by public is read-only, not that people can write to it. But later. So I think I'd really like to hear that. I flesh out a little more why it's an important requirement.
Yeah, unless there is something actually secret that's being dealt with.
Yes.
I don't see any reason this needs to be not public.
This is mixing together the three things of people needing time and space to learn, and then people being able to do things without people interfering with it.
Well, as Edgar said, you can avoid the interference point.
Yes, you can avoid the interference by making it thingy. So you could have a period of a few months where it was private for people to learn, but then after that switch to it then being public in a read-only way, so it's not interfered with.
Let me separate process development time from document processing time, right? Maybe while you're developing the process, really hashing things out is really messy. I could see that. Although, again, nothing's actually secret, so it doesn't really seem that useful to keep it private. I don't see any reason when you're document processing why the document processing shouldn't be public. Again, there's nothing secret there. You can set it so there's no interference, so the editors aren't distracted. But honestly, wouldn't it be great if people could see that there is actual work being done on their documents?
No, it's a good point. And what I was saying with the phase one is the just ironing things out as we're coming up to speed on that. So I'd like to move on. John's been in the queue for a while.
So actually, I got distracted by Ecker's point. I didn't get to raise my point. So I was going to respond to what Jay said about who forks what. So there's a bit of an ownership question. I think when I originally commented, I was envisioning that, like, wouldn't it be great if, like, the RPC would just show up in the working group repro and send a PR? I can understand the desire for the RPC to own a repo. The thing for me, I think it's going to be important to guide this to a good outcome is to really laser focus on the auth 48 process. And for me as an author, the thing that's important is that, I have a clean diff. So I need to see the difference from what I submitted, what was the start, to what the RPC has proposed, right? Not just like, here's the document, like auth 48 has been since time immemorial, and I have to go do the diff and figure it out. Like, that's what I wanted to this process, is to have a clean diff from the submitted thing to the edited thing, so that I can go through and review and approve the edits.
So yes, and we do provide diffs from the version that's in Data Tracker to what we're presenting at Auth 48. But I think, Richard, perhaps you're talking about, you would like, as Ecker calls, the fair copy. So we work in the format that you submitted, which would be Markdown.
Yeah, and I think the GitHub edition there is the ability to use those tools to address individual edits. So it's not just passing whole files back and forth.
Okay. John.
I want to speak a bit from the standpoint of an old fart who doesn't particularly like GitHub, and who's written a lot of documents and has worked on and off with the RFC series and its design decisions since before most of you have heard of the IETF. And I want to address Jay's question and my version of it. I want to say that I thought I was agreeing with Ecker on most things until that stopped, and I'm agreeing with Richard on most things until I get the creeps. I don't care what you do internally during your internal workings on a document, and I shouldn't need to care, and if I do need to care, that's a problem. I am very scared about opening up Auth 48, even as a public read-only process, to the community, and I think the comment was made in the chat about one person who's got a clear idea about how editorial work should be styled, and is going to get very insistent and disruptive and take things to the IETF list and threaten lawyers and who knows what else. We've seen that behavior. We don't need to deal with it. When you take the position, as we have taken the position for 30 or more years, that once the RFC editor process gets its hands on a document approved by the IETF, there may be a final sign-off in the IETF process, but there isn't any meddling by the IETF community in that document. That's different from dialogue between the RPC and authors, but it's a very different situation from opening that up to community. The second problem is that I, as an author, want to see what comes to me in the Auth 48 process in the form in which it went into that process. And if that is RFC XML, that's fine. If it is GitHub, that's fine. If you decide to go back to accepting documents in, sorry, not GitHub, but Markdown. If you decide to go back to accepting documents in MS Word, that's fine too. That's a separate set of decisions. But to say, presto, I'm putting this into the RFC editing process in XML, and what you're going to give me out is Markdown in GitHub, that doesn't work, and it's going to cost you authors, and it's going to cost you claims of, it's going to cause problems about claims the idea is open and what have you. So I think there's some very, very clear boundaries there. And as long as you're careful about those boundaries, I think whatever you decide is efficient internally is wonderful. and that this group making suggestions is fine, but meddling in that is a bad idea, and that opening that up to invite the community meddling in that is a genuinely terrible idea. End of rant, at least for the moment.
Okay, so some comments. When we're working in a GitHub repo during Auth48, we would add the authors and the stream manager as collaborators. So it's not, yes, everyone will be able to view the repo, but only the authors, the AD who needs to approve things can make updates. And we are working on, so you mentioned you didn't want your XML to be turned into Markdown for Auth48, but we've been doing this to people who have been working in Markdown for a while, and they've gotten frustrated with that. So we're wanting to accommodate that by providing Markdown at the beginning of Auth48 for people who submitted in Markdown. So, Jay.
Thanks.
I think you're accommodating different users and different authors who work in different ways daily. I think you're forcing authors into, for example, working in GitHub at Auth48.
John, there's no forcing here.
Force.
This conversation is solely about people who want to be involved in GitHub, how they can be involved in GitHub. It is not about any forcing or anything like that. It's just for the GitHub aficionados who really want this to work in a particular way. Okay.
Okay. In that way, it's fine, but that wasn't what I was hearing you saying.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's absolutely the case. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Just to move on. So there are two things here that I don't think are clear still. The phase 2 only envisages the repository being open at the Auth48 stage. That's not what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is that people want the repository visible from the very beginning, but no interaction allowed until the Auth48 stage. Okay. Or an agreement that no interaction is allowed until the Auth48 stage. Okay. That's a very separate thing. The second thing is, I just, and unless anybody really wants to jump in on that, I'll go on to the next thing. So the next thing is...
Actually, Jay, I would like to jump in on that. You heard from people saying that they really wanted it to be open, but read only. I don't, because I sincerely think the people here who are saying, oh, it's safe to open it being read only, maybe people will want to get involved, but we'll just make it read only, vastly overestimate underestimate how difficult it is to tell people who have a legitimate concern that they see in this repo that they just don't get heard. So I think that this discussion should continue. We shouldn't assume opening it early with read only will be safe.
I think we have an overwhelming policy around transparency, and we have an equivalent functionality in Auth48 being entirely open through the Auth48 list. So, okay, I understand, right? So it's not full agreement, but that's useful. The second thing was Richard said wanting to start Auth48 with a clean diff. It's still not clear to me, Richard, whether you mean a single big, in GitHub terms, a single big PR commit, whatever, or whether you mean you want to start Auth48 seeing the series of commits that have been made by the editors to that point.
I would say more the former than the latter. So I think what the process I'm sort of envisioning as we're talking about here is like you initialize the repo with the source material. The RPC goes off and works in a branch, and then Auth48 is initialized when there's a pull request to the starting point branch from the edit branch. So there's one big pull request that has all the edits. I can go through and look at the individual commits if I care, but I don't actually care about the individual commits. I care about seeing the difference between the source document and the edited document, and being able to use the PR tools to look to negotiate the individual changes in there. So it's more about negotiating edits than about commits.
Does everyone else agree with Richard?
Yeah, I do. And I think I actually want to try to sharpen Richard's point. If the RPC did not use Git over their internal processes and they just like did it all on their disks the way they're doing now, and then uploaded a PR at the end of the day, that would be a satisfactory outcome. And I understand that people may think that pushes against what I said about transparency, but my point of transparency is not that I think we have to like go way out of our way to be transparent. My point is, once you have something in a public place, the idea that we're going to market private for this reason seems silly. I do not think it's necessary to preserve the unsquashed history of the changes that the RPC made. I just think that locking it down is not really an appropriate practice. What I think is important is that this be broken up into a small enough chunks that it is apprehensible to the authors. And I think we talked about this before. This is the question of the fair copy versus the formatting. What I want to be able to do, I trust the RPC to be able to manage to be able to manage the XML formatting and that kind of stuff by and large, right? And certainly I trust them. I'm too lazy to go review it. But I do want to look at everything that changes the actual text of the RFC. And so having a PR that basically separates those is important. And so to the extent to which So what I don't want to have happen is what kind of happens now, which is the entire thing is airdropped on me in one big PR. Effectively, I have to manage it, right? But if auth read is handled in Markdown, then that's not a problem because I'm assuming what I'm reading into this is effectively a two-phase process, right? Where there's effectively we get a PR in the Markdown or in the original XML source, but without a bunch of XML machinery done, and that is revised the way we're iterated the way we're just talking about. That is then merged in, and then you'd go back and the last phase cleans up, which by and large again we ignore, right? Until the very end where people kind of go, okay, well I want to look at the final text to make sure nothing got screwed up. So I think that's the only requirement I have. I don't think that having the entire history of every commit is important. And I actually don't plan to go back and look at them.
All right, Richard.
That's still a hand. Go ahead.
Oh,
it does sound to me as if sorry, Jean, did you want to?
No, I would just say, Jay, please go.
Oh, thank you. So it does actually sound to me as if Eric and Richard, you're saying different things. And I'm not suggesting you have to agree, by the way. I just want to make sure I understand this. That, Richard, you were happy with one big stuff, not particularly broken out, but Eric wants it broken out in some way, some structure around it.
No, I think we more or less agree. I think it would be an acceptable starting point, at least to me, to process all the changes to the doc in one go. But I think in my mind, I was probably imagining mainly the content changes in the source doc. If you're editing a Markdown file, you're not tweaking XML things, which is one of the separations I think Eric was pointing to. So yeah, I think the only difference between what I was saying and what Ecker was saying is in Ecker's proposal, maybe it's not just one PR. Maybe you do a PR when all the content changes are in, and you do a second PR that would address, say, XML nets.
Yeah, I mean, what I imagine typically, in my experience, when we're these documents internally, right? A PR will maybe have 20 commits in it, right? That are stacked up. There are a bunch of changes people have made that are I made this and I made this, and this can be even more true in this case when you're well, we had this issue and this issue and this issue, and they're all got stacked up. And my point is, those are all individual commits. I don't care about any of those, right? You just handled those in whatever way you pleased, right? What I care about is being able to group together things that I need to review all in one piece without distraction. And of course that will inevitably end up. And by the way, I think we're going to end up, because we have these in the auth stage, as Jean pointed out earlier, we're going to have all these issues. Each one will probably be associated with PR, and so you end up with a whole stack of commits there too, right? But I think Richard and I, by and large, agree. Hopefully, if people disagree, then we have a different then we have a misunderstanding. Because I think Richard and I have talked about this and probably agree.
Paul.
I want to agree with Ecker and Richard, and then Jean say to you or to all of the RPC folks, a good way to keep all of us happy is to do lots of commits per pull request. Is when you've done a pass with this idea in your head, Just do a commit. Don't worry about pushing things right then. That's where authors who are reviewing things, like if they go like, "Ooh, when did this happen?" It's handy to go back and find a commit and such like that. That will be rare, but you can keep us happy doing that. Don't worry about the number of pull requests nearly as much as commits as you're working.
Right. And that is the plan. And also people had mentioned separating content changes from formatting. As I mentioned, the workflow that I'm envisioning is that the formatter has their branch that they're working in. So you can see what changes were made just to update the formatting. And the copy editing changes occur in another branch, and these can be reviewed separately. And also just not even using GitHub, but our process for editing and Markdown, it allows authors to focus on the content edits, and then we convert it to RFC XML, and that's the formatting step, the big formatting step. And the content changes will have been approved, and then the authors review that final step to go, okay, yeah, the final outputs look good.
Thanks. So it seems to me that there is sufficient looseness and uncertainty about the structure of what is given at, when all 48 starts, that we should attempt simply to have the RPC do the small commits, learn these bits, then see what you get, and then refine that process. So rather than try to set a goal initially up front about what those commits and stuff should attempt to do. Is that reasonable, or would you prefer, trying to set a goal now?
I mean, I disagree. There's much ambiguity here. Like, I honestly don't think the commits matter. Like, what matters at the end of the day is the edit, the PR. And I think mainly the main upshot of all this discussion is that like auth 48 is like would work better for folks if there were basically two steps to it. There's the content approval where you're editing in the source, where you're working in the source format. You're looking at a PR on the source format and approving the content. And then there's the formalize it into XML and finalize it that way, which is whatever the XML minutiae that people care about. So basically, instead of back and forth on an XML file, it's a content PR and a finalize the XML PR.
I agree with everything Richard just said. And I think just to try to sharpen that a little bit, my experience is there's quite a bit of iteration on the content, because people actually see things like, I don't like this change or whatever, and by and large the formatting is like right, and and people may have like a nit or two, but there's not a lot of iteration. So things like separating those out is very helpful. Also because the other thing is, like, in my experience with documents, like the maybe this doesn't happen on other people's documents, but like I get the revised machinery from the RPC, and I go through it, and as part of that process, we end up with a bunch of other suggestions about like content changes that we have to make in issues, and so like the thing evolves, and so we end up with like a bunch of stacked PRs on that, and then that thing has to be turned into the formatted version. And so like I think that's another reason that why separating this is helpful. I mean, other people are more disciplined about their authorities than I am, but like like what I do is I go and I read the entire document, and so like I find all kinds of stuff that I think needs to be fixed. That was like my mistake that nobody else caught. So I think like once you see those things, like I just think like that's a really sensible way to break it up. But again, I don't care if everything the RPC sent me is in one giant commit, because like it's actually like remarkably useless and get to like look at those commits. I mean, as Paul says, it's like helpful to like be able to like who made what idiot made this mistake, or that was me. But like it's really not very helpful in the GitHub interface to be like, I want to, like, this change was bad, I'm taking it out. Like, I mean, you can do that in principle, but it's just about trying to pain in the ass. It's easier to revert them on the end rather than to try to pull the commits out of the stack. So I mean, the commit history in GitHub is very helpful to me.
All right, Richard. Nope. Okay, Jay.
Yeah, so Jane, you may have been able to answer this, but do you understand what is meant by a content PR and a finalize the XML PR?
Yes, I do.
Right. And how practical do you think that is to achieve?
That's very easy.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yep. Alice?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I have a different feeling on it than Jean does for that question. So I see the format changes as somewhat more intertwined with content changes. And our most recent Markdown training also supports that experience. So essentially right now, like the examples that come to mind are list formatting, that we see a lot of changes to definition lists, or we see a lot of artwork that should become a table. Less so now than we did a few years ago, but those are a few examples. But sometimes a suggestion that you're making that would be a quote unquote content edit has a format implication, right? Like you're going to change a paragraph in order to be a list, for example. Not every edit has a format implication, but these, like when I'm editing a document, those content and format edits are happening at the same time. And what we learned in the Markdown training is there's all these things you can do format-wise in Markdown that we wouldn't have to save until the XML formalization step. So I see that separation as possible, but contrived. Like then you would like be restraining yourself from doing edits or saving things for later that you could have just easily done in the Markdown in order to satisfy the requirement for a clean split between content and format. I do think for simplistic documents that separation works well, but once you get something more complex, I don't think it is quite as easy. And then in terms of a quote unquote natural editing process, right? Like going through a document start to finish, going back and realizing, oh, what I changed in this section affects these previous sections. I also see the content format separation as tricky for that aspect.
So just to clarify what my earlier proposal, what I meant when I said content edit is basically whatever can be reflected in the source format. Right. So if you want to like change a paragraph to a bulleted list in Markdown, great. That's like easy to review. I think mainly the distinction in my mind is the thing where you work in the source format versus all the XML nonsense. Does that make sense?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alice. No, I think like largely that reflects my view. I think this was like a little different when people were working at XML. Like I think there was like a sort of like a one split, and now there's Markdown. There's a different split. And I guess they'll still work at XML, and maybe they don't feel different than I do. I would be perfectly happy if like we just agreed that like you made changes to Markdown, and they all got one thing, and then that got sent to me, and then I did whatever changes I was going to make, and then you turned it in XML, and we made different set of changes. That would be satisfactory to me. So I don't feel like there has to be like a really a more direct split than that. Basically, what I would say is like when I've worked in XML, what I found was like I would look at the diff that the RPC sent me, and it had like a whole bunch of changes that looked like someone reformatted the XML on me and made like cross-reference changes and stuff like that. And I didn't care about any of those things, and all I cared about was the output, and so I just processed like the text file, right? And so I think Markdown kind of makes that much harder to do. And so and so I care about all of this, but like really seriously, for the purpose of this discussion, I suspect that the set of people who want this kind of like content formatting split and a set of people working Markdown is effectively coextensive. And so if we just agreed that like there was a Markdown pass and then there was an XML pass, I think that would be totally, I think I'd get the job done pretty well. I suspect there's almost nobody who like thinks about it this way that like hasn't switched to Markdown already.
All right. Thank you. Jay?
Thanks. So in interest of time, I had another question as well, which I didn't see come through, which is about the current process so far sees a branch created for a set of edits, and then periodically that branch is committed into main, okay, merged into main. All right. Forgive me, the terminology is incorrect. It's not clear to me how this process will handle any changes the authors might make to the document independently of this of the editing work. Is perhaps a slightly different branching strategy necessary in order to be able to manage that, such as, for example, a main RPC branch where everything goes into keeping main untouched, so that main can then be compared with the, with anything else, with what the authors are up to.
That may be one way to do it. Also, for work in Auth 48, there would be an Auth 48 branch where we would, so for first phase, where we're just working in the repo, there would be this Auth 48 branch. The for working with authors in the GitHub repo during Auth 48, we would be we would have pull requests open for them to review. And if they want to make changes, they can create their own pull requests.
I mean, I think we may be like overthinking this and making it too complicated. Like,
But
I think it would be like you could have a process in which the only folks who could actually make commits to the repo were the RPC. Right, so the RPC would make the edits. Nobody gets to touch the document while the RPC is working on it. Auth 48, they create a PR. Authors can propose changes in the PR in their comments. Right, there's a handy little diff, make a diff, propose some changes, things, which the RPC can accept as the author's inputs. And I think that would probably, like a process like that would be simple, and I think would probably address, would be like a 90% solution. I think the only thing I would do other than that, if you wanted to allow more fulsome input from the authors, would be, as Jean said, to let the authors make a pull request. If say the authors are like, I really want to make some totally big change that's not just like a point edit.
well, for instance, sorry for to interrupt, but perhaps
Yeah.
some technical issue came up while the document was in the queue. The authors could make that pull request, and then the AD could be the approver of that pull request.
Sure.
And then once they approve, the RPC could merge that, which would follow our current process. The authors suggest a technical change, and we say, hey, AD, please look at this diff and let us know if you approve.
Yeah, you could, like I said, you could allow authors to submit pull requests. And I think it would probably make sense to have the RPC in control of dealing with merge conflicts and deciding when to merge the PRs and all that with AD approval, etc. So yeah, I think this is a fairly natural workflow. It can be centered on RPC doing most of the changes, and we can create windows as needed for authors to have input.
All right, Paul?
I'm concerned about letting anyone do pull requests other than the RPC. I know I'm probably in the minority here. I would strongly prefer that we keep the current process, which is when the authors say, we need to make this change, the working group's agreed or whatever, that it gets sent to somebody at the RFC editor. They open up a change, they do a pull request, they get it accepted. Saying authors can open up, pull requests opens it up to, as I had said before, my concern, which other people don't seem to have, anybody feeling like they can do it. So my preference would be to keep the current process, and that somebody at the RFC editor has to go, yes, this is an author. Yes, we've gotten it, approved by the AD. We will put it in and mark it as such.
Yeah, that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. Like, I make all kinds of changes in Auth 48 that the idea to send them an old new format is bananas. No.
Ecker, I'm talking about before Auth 48. I'm talking about during the editing process.
Oh, so the fun thing is, my idea is, well, the authors submit that to Data Tracker, and either Data Tracker or Purple creates the pull request on our repo with the authors have made a document. Oh, So I see I see a yes and I see a no.
That's
But this is also paired with the ID can only be published at Data Tracker after AD approval. So document has been approved, it's in the queue, authors, they caught something, they need to make some technical change. They submit that change to the data tracker, the AD approves it at the data tracker, and then it gets published, and then Purple or data tracker does a pull request on our repo and says, hey, you know, we have an approved update. And then the editor can review that and merge it.
Yeah, I think that's like really quite inadvisable. We already have an existing process. Like we have this whole process, machinery of GitHub and approvals to do all this machinery and reinventing that into some, you know, in some new process. But I think like, I guess I'd also be willing to agree if like for the purpose of this discussion, if we just want to agree that like any changes while that like when they get sent to the RPC and any changes until auth48 like are some unspecified process, like I can live with that too. I can live with that. Like what I care about, what I care, I mean, I'm willing to hold my changes until auth48. But what I care about is that when I finally get to auth48, I can prep the changes I need to make, like without having to like send some new ID.
So
right.
Can I sorry, just summarize. So are you all okay then if we basically say no changes until auth48?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Are you comfortable with that,
Jay,
Gene?
I think that's unwise for some of the changes that I've seen being made, where there will be a whole paragraph being sent in, or a change in references, like we don't want to wait for this cluster anymore for this misref, so we are going to actually change your sentences. I think it's mostly doable, but I don't think that's universally doable in auth48.
I mean,
So
the working group can do this in their own repo. They can like make the changes on their own, and then the only question is like whether you send them right away or whether you queue them up in the working group repo and just send them when auth48 starts. And I think the latter is totally fine. And it's much simpler.
Sorry, I just want to interject here. We've got like 3 minutes, but we currently have processes to deal with technical changes that occur while the document is in the queue. This happens like once a week to us, where we get a new version from notice from Data Tracker. But I would like to thank everyone for their time. We've got like 3 minutes left. I see Ecker and Richard in the queue real quick. Ecker?
That's actually just bad queue management on my part, but since I'm still here, I guess it'd be useful to me to understand what the timeline projected here is. Like for like to get to phase 2, because that's really what I care about. So I think like
okay, my rough estimate is late next summer. We will be doing, so our software rollout is going to be happening in the spring. In our roadmap document on the wiki, it talks about things that need to be in place before like phase 1 can happen and what needs to happen for phase 2 can happen. But so Richard is like a year.
Yeah,
well,
I think
this project is already like 5 years overdue. So like, what's another year? But like let's get this done, folks.
Yeah, I'd like to. I think maybe we need to schedule another meeting to talk about how that timeline can be accelerated. This is just like, I mean, that's like a very, very long timeline from my perspective. Like I mean, I thought you were going to say end of the year and I was going to be okay, but like.
Well, so it's less than a year. It's basically 1 year from now.
I know, but like I thought you were going to say like end of this year.
Anything more than a quarter seems extravagant to me. This is ridiculous.
So this discussion can take place at the RPC month.
Great.
Sorry.
Yep.
Just to say, this discussion can take place at the RPC monthly next week.
Sounds good.
Good time to say that.
You can do that. Thanks.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you for your time. And hope to see you next week at our community call. Thanks.